The pen felt heavy in my hand, its sleek metal cool against my fingers. Across the marble island of my daughter's kitchen, my son-in-law, Kevin, flashed a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "It's just a formality, Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "It simply gives me the authority to streamline your portfolio. We can get you into some much more aggressive growth funds than that dusty old bakery account." I looked down at the document again, at the dense paragraphs of legal jargon that felt intentionally confusing. My daughter Jessica let out an exaggerated sigh from the other side of the room, the sound of her nail file scraping back and forth filling the silence. I hesitated, pointing to a clause. "This part here," I started. "It seems to give you a lot of control." That's when she stood up, tossing the file onto the counter. "Oh my God, Mom," she snapped. "Kevin manages a $50 million fund for his firm. I think he can handle your little nest egg from the bakery. Just sign it so we can make our dinner reservation." A little nest egg. Those 4 words hit me harder than a physical blow. 30 years of 4 a.m. mornings, of hauling 50-pound bags of flour, of building a business with my own 2 hands, all of it reduced to a quaint little hobby. In her eyes, I wasn't a founder. I was just a foolish old woman clinging to her cookie money. But that casual insult, as sharp and cold as it was just the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for years. To understand how we got to that breaking point, you have to understand the life I built and the sacrifices she was so eager to forget. That bakery wasn't a nest egg, it was my entire world. I called it Evelyn's Hearth. And for 30 years, it was the first thing I saw in the morning and the last thing I thought about at night. The life of a baker isn't glamorous. It's a life lived in reverse, waking up when the rest of the world is going to sleep. I can still feel the chill of the pre-dawn air as I'd unlock the front door, the only light on the street coming from my shop window. The first thing I'd do is turn on the big Hobart mixer. Its low hum was the heartbeat of my business, the rhythm I built my life around. My hands, now spotted with age, still remember the exact feel of dough coming to life under my palms, that perfect moment when it goes from a shaggy mess to something smooth, alive, and full of promise. That promise was for Jessica. Every single ounce of flour, every pound of sugar, every early morning and late night was for her. I remember her as a little girl, perched on a stool with a smudge of chocolate on her cheek, trying to mimic the way I piped roses onto a birthday cake. I remember one summer, the air conditioner in the shop broke during a brutal July heat wave. I had a massive wedding cake order, a 5-tier monster that was going to pay for Jessica's braces. I worked for 2 straight days in what felt like a sauna, with wet towels wrapped around my neck, my vision blurry from sweat. I missed my 20-year high school reunion for that cake, but when I saw Jessica's perfect, straight smile a year later, I knew I'd make that choice 100 times over. That bakery put her through summer camps, paid for her first car, and funded the college education that landed her the marketing job where she met Kevin. My business wasn't just cookie money, it was her entire childhood. It was my legacy, and she had just dismissed it like it was a garage sale hobby. A few days after that disastrous dinner reservation, I was trying to put it out of my mind. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was doing what I always do, sorting the mail at the kitchen table. Bill junk, bill junk. It was a familiar, mindless routine. But then my hand paused over a thick, glossy pamphlet. The paper was expensive, the kind that feels slick and heavy under your thumb. The photo on the front was of a smiling, silver-haired couple walking on a beach, looking serene and carefree. The company name was printed in a gentle, looping script, Silver Lining Senior Solutions. I didn't remember requesting it. I get a ton of junk mail for walk-in tubs and reverse mortgages, but this felt different, more personal. I was about to toss it into the recycling pile when I glanced at the address label. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't addressed to me. It read, Jessica and Kevin Miller C. divided by O. Evelyn Hayes, 124 Oak Street. Care of Evelyn Hayes. As if I were a package being managed, as if this was already their address, and I was just a resident. My heart started a low, heavy drumming against my ribs. My hands, which had shaped thousands of delicate pastries, suddenly felt clumsy. I slid my thumb under the seal and pulled out the brochure. The language inside was sickeningly sweet, full of phrases about honoring your loved one's legacy and easing the burden on your children. It talked about a seamless transition. offering services for estate liquidation, property management, and long-term care placement. It was a beautifully designed advertisement for erasing a person. Section after section detailed how they could help children manage the assets of an aging parent who was no longer fully capable. A cold dread, slick and oily, seeped into my bones. This wasn't a random piece of junk mail. This was research. I thought of Kevin's words a few nights before. Streamline your portfolio. Aggressive growth funds. It wasn't about helping me. It was about getting control. I thought of Jessica's impatience, her dismissive tone. It wasn't just a moment of stress. It was contempt. They saw my life's work, my hearth, as a pile of cash waiting to be unlocked. They saw me as the lock. For a moment, I tried to find an innocent explanation. Maybe they were just worried about me. Maybe they were planning for the distant future. But my gut, the same gut that told me when a bread dough was perfectly proofed or when a cake was baked to perfection, was screaming at me. You don't send away for brochures like this unless you're making a plan. I looked around my kitchen, at the photos on the fridge of Jessica's graduation, her wedding. For years, this house had been a place of warmth and love. Suddenly, it felt different. It felt like a transaction, an asset. I folded the brochure carefully, the glossy paper crinkling in protest. I walked over to the bookshelf in the living room, the one filled with my collection of old cookbooks. I pulled out my mother's copy of The Joy of Cooking, its spine soft and frayed with age. I opened it to the section on breads and slipped the brochure between the pages for sourdough starter, a secret hidden inside a legacy. I didn't know what their full plan was yet, but standing there in the quiet of my own home, I knew the carefree piece of my retirement was over. The game had changed. And from that moment on, I started paying very, very close attention. Paying close attention was a skill I'd learned behind the counter of my bakery. You learn to read people. You know the woman ordering a black coffee at 6 a.m. is heading to a long shift at the hospital. You know the young man buying a single cupcake on a Tuesday afternoon is probably trying to apologize to his girlfriend. You learn to spot the details. And as I stood there in my kitchen, the glossy, chemical smell of that brochure filling my nose, it was the details that came flooding back to me. That sterile corporate smell was the exact opposite of the memory it triggered. My memory smelled like yeast, warm sugar, and the faint, clean scent of milled flour. It smelled like my life's work. It smelled like Evelyn's hearth. I'd started the bakery with nothing but a second mortgage on this very house and a stubborn refusal to fail. I was 36, a single mom, and everyone told me I was crazy. It's a tough business, Ev, my own brother had warned me. 90% of restaurants fail in the first year. I knew he was right. The first few years were brutal. I was a one-woman show, living a life in reverse. My alarm would go off at 2:30 a.m., a time that doesn't even feel like it belongs to a day. I'd drive through silent, sleeping streets to the small storefront I was renting. The big Hobart mixer was my only companion in those early hours. Its low, powerful hum was the heartbeat that kept me going. My hands tell the whole story. Back then, they were strong and capable, but always covered in a fine dusting of flour, with nicks from bread knives and small, pale burn scars on the knuckles from reaching into the deep deck ovens. These were the hands that hauled 50-pound sacks of flour from the storeroom, that kneaded hundreds of pounds of dough before the sun came up, that decorated wedding cakes with a surgeon's steadiness, even when my feet were throbbing with pain. This was the world Jessica grew up in. The bakery wasn't some abstract place I went to work. It was her second home. After school, she'd do her homework at the little corner table, the air thick with the smell of cooling bread. I'd pass her a warm chocolate chip cookie, a little perk of being the baker's daughter. I taught her how to crimp the edges of a pie crust and how to pipe a perfect rosette. I thought I was teaching her about hard work, about what it takes to build something from nothing. I thought she was watching. I remember one brutal heat wave in July, the kind where the asphalt on the street gets soft and sticky. The bakery's ancient air conditioner finally gave up the ghost. It felt like I was working inside an oven. I had a 5-tier wedding cake due that Saturday, a massive, complicated order that I knew would finally pay for the braces Jessica desperately needed. She was 13 and so self-conscious about her crooked teeth that she'd learned to smile without showing them. For 2 straight days, I worked in that suffocating heat, with wet towels draped around my neck and a fan that did little more than push hot air around. I missed my 20-year high school reunion for that cake. On Saturday evening, covered in powdered sugar and sweat, I watched the caterers carefully load the finished masterpiece into their van. I was so exhausted I could barely stand. But a year later, when Jessica came home from the orthodontist with her braces finally off, she gave me a huge, beaming, perfectly straight smile. In that moment, every second of misery in that hot kitchen was worth it. Every penny of profit from that bakery went into her. It paid for the summer camps she loved, the clarinet she played in the school band, and the down payment on her first car, a reliable little Honda Civic I'd found for her. While other families were going on vacation, I was taking on extra catering jobs on Sundays, my only day off, to build up her college fund. Every Thanksgiving and Christmas, I'd be at the hearth by 4 a.m., baking hundreds of pies for other families' holiday dinners. I'll never forget the day I dropped her off at her college dorm. We'd packed up that Honda Civic with everything she owned. As I was about to leave, she threw her arms around me, her face buried in my shoulder. She was crying. "Mom, I don't know how you did all this," she whispered into my old baking apron, which I was still wearing. "I promise. When I graduate, I'm going to get a great job and I'll take care of you. You'll never have to wake up at 2 a.m. again." I stood there in my kitchen, the memory as clear as if it were yesterday. My gaze fell on my hands resting on the counter. They were softer now, the skin thinner and dappled with age spots. The burn scars had faded. To my daughter and her husband, they were the hands of an old woman who needed managing. They had forgotten what these hands had built, but I hadn't. I tucked the brochure back inside my mother's old cookbook. This wasn't just about a portfolio or a house. This was about a promise, the promise a daughter had made to her mother, and the promise I now had to make to myself, to protect the legacy that my two hands had worked a lifetime to build. To protect that legacy, I knew I couldn't confront them directly. Not yet. A cornered animal is a dangerous one, and I had no idea how deep their plans went. So, I did what any good baker does when developing a new recipe. I watched, I waited, and I took meticulous notes. The campaign against my mind began not with a bang, but with the quiet, insistent click of a label maker. I came into my kitchen one morning to find small, white plastic labels stuck to my cabinets. Flour, sugar, spices, plates. They were printed in a neat, sterile, all-caps font. I ran my finger over the one that said coffee mugs. It was stuck right above the glass-fronted cabinet where my coffee mugs have been for the last 35 years. It was so absurd it was almost funny. I was a woman who could tell the difference between bread flour and cake flour just by the feel of it between my fingers, and my daughter apparently thought I'd forget where I kept my plates. Jessica was there, sipping a smoothie. "Just thought I'd help you get a little more organized, Mom," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Things can get so confusing." I didn't say a word. I just opened the cabinet, took out my favorite mug, a heavy ceramic one from a craft fair in Vermont, and poured my coffee. The little white label stared at me like an indictment. It wasn't about organization. It was about establishing a narrative. Mom is confused. Mom is forgetful. Mom needs help. It was the first brick in the wall they were building around me. The second brick was laid a week later by Kevin. He came over on a Saturday afternoon, ostensibly to fix my slow Wi-Fi. He sat at my desk, his fingers flying across my laptop keyboard. After half an hour, he stood up with that same polished smile. "All set, Evelyn," he announced. "I boosted your signal and, while I was at it, I went ahead and updated your online banking password, wrote the new one down for you right here." He gestured to a yellow sticky note on the monitor. On it was a long, nonsensical string of letters, numbers, and symbols. "You can't be too careful with security these days," he added. "I'll just take care of paying your bills online from now on. It'll be one less thing for you to worry about." He said it so casually, as if he were taking out the trash for me. But what I heard was the sound of a door being locked, my own financial door. For 40 years I had balanced my own books, first for my household, then for a thriving business. I'd negotiated with suppliers, managed payroll, and filed my own taxes. Now, this man who married my daughter 2 years ago was telling me I couldn't be trusted to pay my own electric bill. I felt a surge of hot anger, but I swallowed it down. I smiled sweetly. "Oh, Kevin, you think of everything. Thank you." The most insidious brick, however, was laid by Jessica over the phone. "Mom, where are you?" Her voice was laced with a theatrical, panicked concern. "I've been waiting at the Olive Garden for 20 minutes. We were supposed to have lunch. I was in my garden, pruning my rose bushes. My hands were covered in dirt." "Lunch? Honey, we didn't have plans for lunch today." There was a long, drawn-out sigh on the other end of the line. "Mom, yes we did. We talked about it on Sunday. I was going to help you sort through your winter clothes afterwards. Don't you remember?" Her voice was so full of practiced pity. "See, this is what I'm talking about. You've been so forgetful lately. It's really starting to worry me." My mind raced, flipping back through my memory of Sunday. We had talked, yes. She had mentioned needing to sort her winter clothes. We had never mentioned the Olive Garden. It was a complete fabrication. A lie designed to make me doubt my own mind. In that moment, standing among my roses with the sun on my face, I felt a profound chill. This was a level of cruelty I could never have imagined. It was a calculated, deliberate effort to make me feel like I was going crazy. "Oh, honey," I said, my voice intentionally shaky and thin. "Oh my goodness, it must have completely slipped my mind. I am so sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me these days." "It's okay, Mom," she said, her voice softening now that she'd achieved her goal. "Don't worry, we'll reschedule." I hung up the phone and stared at my hands, at the dirt caked under my fingernails. This was real. This was the earth. The gaslighting, the labels, the locked accounts, that was the fiction. They thought they were dealing with a frail old woman. They had forgotten I was a baker. I knew how to follow a recipe. I knew that careful preparation was the key to a perfect result. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that their recipe was going to fail. They were building a case against me, brick by brick. It was time for me to start building my own. They were building a case against me, brick by brick, a foundation of lies to prove I was incompetent. And as I stood there in my kitchen that day, a strange and cold clarity washed over me. If they wanted a confused, forgetful old woman so badly, then that's exactly what I would give them. If they were writing a script for my decline, I would become its star actress. My whole life I had played the part of the devoted mother and the tireless worker. This new role would be my masterpiece. So I decided to help them build their case. The long con began with small, seemingly insignificant things. I started leaving my reading glasses in the refrigerator. I'd ask Jessica the same question about her day twice in the same phone call. I'd accidentally put salt in the sugar bowl, then act flustered and embarrassed when I realized my mistake. Each time, I'd see a quick, knowing glance pass between Jessica and Kevin. It was a look of satisfaction, of confirmation. Their narrative was taking shape, and they believed they were the authors. They had no idea I was feeding them every single line. The real test, my first big performance, came during our weekly trip to Costco. Jessica insisted on it, saying it was too overwhelming for me to handle alone anymore. I used to love those trips, stocking up on the industrial-sized bags of flour and sugar that fueled my bakery. Now, the cavernous warehouse felt like a stage. As we walked in, I let my face go slack, my eyes wide with a look of manufactured confusion at the sheer scale of it all. I gripped the oversized shopping cart like a life raft. "Oh my," I murmured, loud enough for her to hear. "It's all so much." Jessica patted my arm, a gesture that was meant to look comforting but felt deeply condescending. "It's okay, Mom. Just stick with me. I've got the list." I let her lead me through the aisles. I, a woman who could manage the inventory of a commercial bakery in her sleep, pretended to be baffled by the choices. "Should we get the organic spinach or the regular?" I'd ask, staring at the packages as if they were complex legal documents. "We always get the organic, Mom," she'd reply with a patient sigh. Every sigh was a small victory for me. It meant the performance was working. We got to the checkout, and as she was paying, I let my gaze wander around the store, my expression vacant. I was counting the tiles on the ceiling, noting the placement of the security cameras, all while looking like I was lost in a fog. The best lies are always wrapped in a kernel of truth. The truth was, I felt completely disconnected, but not from confusion, from a cold, calculated rage that I had to keep buried deep inside. The real performance began in the parking lot. The vast sea of cars stretched out in every direction under the harsh fluorescent lights. I stopped dead, my hand flying to my mouth. "Oh, Jessica," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I don't remember where we parked." She rolled her eyes, the mask of concern slipping for a fraction of a second. "Mom, we parked right over there. Section C4. I told you to remember it." "C4," I repeated, looking around wildly. "I thought you said G4. Or was it B2? Oh dear. Everything looks the same." I let a genuine tear, born of pure anger, well up in my eye. I let it track a slow path down my cheek. Her exasperation melted back into that practiced, patronizing pity. "Okay, Mom, okay, don't panic." She pulled out her phone and clicked the alarm button on her key fob. Far off in the distance, we heard the faint chirp-chirp of her SUV. "See? There it is. Let's go." As we walked toward the car, I let her hold my elbow, leaning on her more than I needed to. I was the very picture of frailty. Inside, I was steel. I was watching her, studying her. I saw the relief on her face, not that her mother was safe, but that her mother was so clearly and demonstrably failing. Every slip of my mind was another piece of evidence for her. She loaded the groceries into the trunk, chattering away about how we really needed to start thinking about a simpler lifestyle for me. I just nodded along, humming in vague agreement. I climbed into the passenger seat and buckled my seatbelt, my movements intentionally slow and a little shaky. While her back was turned, pushing the giant cart towards the corral, I glanced at my reflection in the passenger side mirror. The woman looking back at me was 68 years old. Her face was lined with the story of her life. But her eyes were not confused. They were sharp, focused, and glinting with a dangerous fire that my daughter had foolishly mistaken for a fading ember. I gave that woman in the mirror a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The show was just beginning. The show was just beginning, and after my star performance in the Costco parking lot, my daughter and son-in-law were convinced they had a hit on their hands. They must have felt the time was right to bring in a producer. My forgetfulness had become the main topic of their concerned whispers, and they decided it was time to introduce a professional into the mix. They were so confident in my decline that they brought the wolf right to my front door, expecting me to welcome him as a sheep. He arrived on a Thursday morning. A man named Mr. Davies from Silver Lining Senior Solutions. He had the kind of expensive, toothy smile you see on billboards, and the soft, manicured hands of a man who has never done a day of real labor in his life. He smelled faintly of cologne and condescension. Jessica and Kevin were already there, flanking him on my living room sofa like Secret Service agents. They had arranged the whole thing, of course, presenting it to me as a casual chat with a friend who was an expert in retirement planning. I played my part. I shuffled into the living room, wearing an old, slightly stained cardigan. I offered him a cup of tea, letting my hands tremble just enough as I poured it that a little bit sloshed into the saucer. "Oh dear," I fussed, dabbing at it with a napkin. "My hands just don't listen to me like they used to." Kevin gave Mr. Davies a look that said, "See? This is what we're dealing with, Mr." Davies settled back into the couch, crossing his legs. He spoke to me in that slow, overly loud voice people use when they think you're either a child or an idiot. "Now, Evelyn," he began. "Jessica and Kevin tell me you've built quite an impressive life for yourself. That little bakery of yours must have been wonderful." "It was my hearth," I said quietly, looking at my hands in my lap. Of course," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "And now it's time to enjoy the fruits of your labor without any of the stress. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. Do you find it difficult to keep track of all the paperwork these days? The bills, the taxes? It can be a lot for one person." I looked at him with wide, watery eyes. "It does get so confusing, so many numbers." He leaned forward, his smile widening. This was going exactly as he'd planned. "And that's where we come in. We help simplify things. We consolidate your assets into a single, easy-to-manage trust. Your children can oversee it, ensuring everything is handled properly, and you receive a generous monthly stipend. No more worrying about market fluctuations or property taxes. Just peace of mind." For 20 minutes, he laid out his predatory vision, using soothing words like security, legacy, and care. He was selling my life back to me in the form of an allowance. All the while, I nodded and murmured, "Oh, that does sound simple." And I never was very good with all that. Jessica looked on, radiating a serene, false piety, as if she were rescuing a stray animal. I let the silence hang in the air after he finished his pitch. I looked from Jessica to Kevin, then to the slick salesman on my couch. I appeared to be considering his words, lost in a fog of age and confusion. Then I leaned forward slightly. "That's all very interesting, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time all morning. "But if my assets were liquidated into the kind of irrevocable trust you're describing, could you explain the specific step-up in basis implications for my daughter under the current tax code? Especially concerning the capital gains from the commercial property I sold to fund the bakery 30 years ago." The room went completely still. Mr. Davies' smile froze, then faltered. He blinked. It was as if a math equation had suddenly appeared in the middle of his sales script. He cleared his throat. "Well, the tax implications they can be complex. That's something our legal team would—" I pressed on, my voice still gentle. "Because my understanding is that transferring the asset now, rather than it being part of an inheritance, would negate the step-up, creating a substantial and frankly unnecessary capital gains tax event. We'd be talking about a 6-figure tax bill. Is that the kind of simplification you specialize in?" He was completely floored. His face flushed a dull, angry red. He started shuffling the pristine papers in his lap, his professional veneer cracking to reveal the cheap salesman underneath. He had no answer. He was a predator who had just realized his helpless prey had teeth. Jessica and Kevin just stared, their mouths slightly agape. They didn't understand the financial jargon, but they understood the sudden, dramatic shift in power. They saw a confident expert reduced to a stammering amateur by their confused old mother. Just as quickly as it appeared, the moment was gone. I let my shoulders slump. I fluttered my hand in front of my face as if waving away a bothersome fly. "Oh, goodness me," I said, my voice returning to its frail, wispy tone. "Listen to me. My late husband, God rest his soul, used to go on and on about all that tax nonsense. It must have just popped into my head from somewhere. It's all so confusing. I do apologize." The relief that washed over Jessica's face was palpable. It was a fluke. A weird moment of clarity, a ghost in the machine. Their narrative was safe. The meeting ended soon after. Mr. Davies couldn't get out of my house fast enough, his phony smile looking strained and brittle. After they walked him out, Jessica came back in and patted my shoulder. "You really had him going there for a second, Mom," she said with a little laugh. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about all that complicated stuff. That's what we're here for." I just smiled and nodded, but as I watched them leave, I knew I had found the crack in their armor. They weren't just greedy, they were sloppy, and their expert was a fool. I had been fighting a two-front war. Now I had a third. I had been fighting a two-front war. Now I had a third. But rattling their expert had an unintended side effect. It made Jessica and Kevin double down. My momentary flash of competence was dismissed as a fluke, a good day, which only seemed to prove how unpredictable and unstable my mind was becoming. They were more convinced than ever that their plan was not just profitable, but necessary, and they decided it was time to upgrade their surveillance. The Trojan horse arrived on my 68th birthday, wrapped in cheerful floral paper. "Happy birthday, Mom," Jessica chirped, handing me a small, perfectly square box. Kevin stood behind her, beaming like he'd just invented sliced bread. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside, nestled in white cardboard, was a small, gray, fabric-covered cylinder. A smart speaker. One of those digital assistants that are always listening. "It's the newest model," Kevin said, his voice full of manufactured enthusiasm. "You can ask it for the weather, to play your music, anything you want, and we can program it to give you reminders for your appointments or when to take your pills. Or you can use it to listen in on me," I thought. "You can use it as a witness." The gift was a masterpiece of passive aggression. On the surface, it was thoughtful, modern, and helpful. It was the perfect gift for a concerned daughter to give her aging mother. But I saw it for what it was, a listening device for my own home, another tool to monitor me, to infantilize me, to build their case that I couldn't be trusted to manage my own life. It was a technological leash. I gave them the performance of a lifetime. My eyes widened with delight. I clasped my hands together under my chin. "Oh, you two, you shouldn't have. I don't know the first thing about these complicated gadgets." "Don't you worry, Evelyn," Kevin said, already taking it out of the box. "I'll set it all up for you. It's connected to our family account, so we can even add things to your shopping list remotely if you forget something." "How convenient for you," I thought, as I watched him plug it in on my kitchen counter. He connected it to the Wi-Fi he now controlled and went through the setup process on his phone. Within minutes, a pleasant, female, disembodied voice filled my kitchen. "Hello, I'm ready to help." "See, Mom," Jessica said, squeezing my arm. "Isn't that wonderful? Now you'll never feel alone." I felt anything but. I felt watched. That night, after they had gone, the house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. The smart speaker sat on the counter, its single, small blue light glowing in the dark. It looked like a cyclops' eye, always open, always observing. They thought they had planted a spy in my camp. They had no idea I was about to turn their spy into a double agent. I waited until well after midnight. I made a cup of chamomile tea, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened my tablet. For the next 2 hours, I used the same skills that had allowed me to perfect a 12-layer cake recipe from a tattered French cookbook. I was patient. I was methodical. I read every line of the online user manual for that device. I watched tutorials made by tech-savvy teenagers who spoke a language of gigabytes and algorithms I barely understood. But I understood the principles. A recipe is just a set of instructions. A machine is just a set of rules. I had spent my life mastering both. My fingers, which knew the delicate art of folding egg whites into a batter without deflating it, now learned to navigate the labyrinth of the device's privacy settings. I found the section Kevin had breezed through on his phone. Voice recording history. I saw the default setting was to save recordings for a period to improve the service. He hadn't bothered to change it. Sloppy. With a few careful taps, I navigated to a different screen, an option to review voice history. I learned how to access the log of every command, every question, every sound the device picked up after its wake word was spoken. I could access it all, right from my tablet, which was connected to the same Wi-Fi network. Then I found it. The digital equivalent of a hidden camera. It was an accessibility feature, buried deep in the settings, called Drop-In. It was designed for family members to be able to instantly connect to the device, like an intercom, to check on an elderly relative. When enabled, it would allow Jessica or Kevin to listen in on my kitchen at any time, from anywhere, through the app on their phones. I saw the toggle switch. It was on. Kevin had enabled it. A cold, hard fury solidified in my chest. This wasn't just a gift. It was a bug. It was a violation of the deepest and most sacred kind. They had put a listening device in my home. I took a deep, steadying breath. I did not disable the drop-in feature. I did not erase the voice history. Instead, I made one small, crucial adjustment. I found the notification settings. I turned off the audible chime that would sound when someone was dropping in. They would be able to listen whenever they wanted, and they would think I was completely unaware. I sat back in my chair, the only light in the room coming from the glow of the tablet on my face. The trap was set. They had given me the very tool I needed to catch them. All I had to do now was wait for them to walk into it, believing they were the clever ones, while their own helpful little spy told me everything I needed to know. Their helpful little spy sat on my counter for 2 weeks, a silent, gray cyclops in my kitchen. It played the classical music I asked for while I baked. It gave me the weather forecast while I drank my morning coffee. On the surface, it was a perfectly benign piece of technology, but every time I saw its little blue light, I was reminded of its true purpose. I was living with a wiretap in my own home, a gift from my own daughter. I played my part, continuing my slow, convincing decline, all the while waiting for the moment they would get careless. That moment came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was in my element, doing the one thing that always centered me, baking bread. My hands were dusted with flour, moving with the familiar, rhythmic push and pull of kneading dough on my old wooden butcher block. The air was filled with the warm, earthy smell of yeast coming to life. It was the smell of my hearth, the scent of my independence. Suddenly, the smart speaker on the counter lit up, its blue ring glowing. I hadn't said the wake word. My heart stopped. My hands stilled in the middle of a fold, frozen in the soft, pliable dough. They had dropped in. They were listening. I stayed perfectly still, my breathing shallow. I wanted to see what they would say when they thought the room was empty, when they thought their mother was out in the garden or taking a nap. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the rain against the window pane. Then, Kevin's voice, tinny and disembodied, trickled out of the speaker. "Okay, I think she's out," he said in a low voice. "Davies called. He said the final power of attorney drafts are ready. We just need her signature." Jessica's voice joined his. "Good. God, I thought she was going to blow the whole thing with that tax question last week. Where did that even come from?" "Who knows?" Kevin scoffed. "A lucky guess. A moment of clarity. It doesn't matter. She was back in the fog by the time we left. She'll sign. She trusts us." My knuckles went white as my fists clenched, burying themselves in the dough. Trust. The word was a bitter poison in my ears. I had given her my trust unconditionally for 40 years, and this is what she had done with it. "Once we have that signature," Kevin continued, his voice full of a greedy excitement, "we can start the liquidation. The market is high right now. The timing is perfect. Your mom's nest egg is the seed money for my new firm, Jess. Miller Capital Partners. Can you believe it? In 6 months, we'll be shopping for that vacation house in Sedona." "Sedona," Jessica breathed, the word full of longing. No more miserable winters. There it was. Not a plan to care for me, but a business transaction. A hostile takeover of my life to fund theirs. I felt a profound, hollow ache in my chest. But the final, fatal blow was yet to come. I heard Jessica laugh, a light, carefree sound that was utterly chilling. "It's kind of hilarious when you think about it," she said. "All this stress, all these spreadsheets and meetings with lawyers, all for some cookie money." Cookie money. The sound of the rain faded. The warmth of the kitchen vanished. All I could hear were those 2 words, echoing in the silent space where my heart used to be. My hands, the hands that had hauled the sacks of flour, that had cracked thousands of eggs, that had borne the burns and scars to give her a life I never had, they were covered in the very substance she was mocking. The foundation of her life, dismissed as a pittance. My legacy, my hearth, my entire being, reduced to a joke. I slowly pulled my hands from the dough. I looked at them, caked in white flour. They were the hands of a creator, a builder. They were the hands of a mother who had sacrificed everything, and they were the hands of a fool who had been willingly blind for far too long. The sadness I had felt for weeks didn't curdle into anger. It crystallized into something harder, colder, and far more dangerous: resolve. The conversation from the speaker continued, something about escrow accounts and capital gains, but I wasn't listening anymore. I had heard everything I needed to hear. They had just signed their own confession, and they had delivered it to me themselves, gift-wrapped. I walked over to the sink and washed my hands, scrubbing away the dough and the flour until my skin was raw. I dried them on a clean towel. My movements were calm, precise. The actress was done playing her part. The baker was finished in the kitchen. The woman who was left was someone my daughter had never met, and she was about to make her grand entrance. The woman who was left was someone my daughter had never met, and she was about to make her grand entrance on the biggest stage our small town had to offer. The annual Chamber of Commerce Awards dinner was a stuffy, self-congratulatory affair held at the local country club. It was a sea of bad suits and polite, tinkling laughter. For years, I had supplied the desserts for this very event. Tonight, I was the guest of honor, set to receive the Lifetime Achievement Award for my contributions to the local business community. Jessica and Kevin had insisted on coming. They saw it as the perfect final act in their play, a public demonstration of their loving devotion to their dear, fading mother. They had no idea they were attending their own execution. I didn't wear my usual soft cardigans. I chose a dress I hadn't worn in years, a tailored, deep navy sheath that was elegant and severe. I wore the simple pearl earrings my mother had left me. My hair, usually soft around my face, was swept back in a neat, professional chignon. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a victim. I saw the founder of Evelyn's Hearth. I saw a woman who had once negotiated a lease with 3 hungry bankers and won. I saw armor. When I walked into the ballroom, Jessica and Kevin rushed to my side, flanking me like bookends. Jessica fussed with my collar while Kevin pulled out my chair. "Don't you look wonderful, Mom?" Jessica said, her voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "We're so proud of you." They were basking in the glow of my achievement, believing they were about to inherit the whole kingdom. I just smiled, a calm, placid smile that gave nothing away. I could feel the weight of my small clutch purse in my lap. Inside, next to my lipstick, was my phone. It was fully charged. After the dried chicken and overcooked asparagus, the awards ceremony began. The president of the chamber, a man whose children had grown up on my birthday cakes, stood at the podium and delivered a gushing tribute. He spoke of my work ethic, my resilience, my place as a pillar of the community. Jessica dabbed at a crocodile tear. Kevin put a proprietary hand on my shoulder. I watched them, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold distance. Finally, they called my name. The room erupted in warm, genuine applause. I walked to the stage, my steps steady and sure. I adjusted the microphone and looked out at the faces of people I had known my entire life. My eyes found Jessica and Kevin at their table. They were beaming, their faces glowing with pride. Their pride in a story that was a complete lie. "Thank you, Howard," I began, my voice clear and strong, resonating through the ballroom. "Thank you all. I am so deeply honored to receive this award." I spoke for a few minutes about the early days of the bakery, about the community that had supported me. I made them comfortable. I let them settle in for the folksy, heartwarming speech they were all expecting. "They call this a Lifetime Achievement Award," I continued, letting my eyes sweep the room before landing squarely on my daughter. "And it's had me thinking a lot about what a lifetime of achievement really means. It's not about money. It's about building something that lasts. Something with integrity. A legacy." I paused, letting the word hang in the air. A legacy is a fragile thing. It can be built over a lifetime of 2 a.m. alarms and 50-pound bags of flour, and it can be dismantled in a moment of greed. The room went quiet. The atmosphere had shifted. This was no longer a folksy acceptance speech. Jessica's smile tightened at the edges. "I was recently gifted a piece of modern technology," I said, reaching into my clutch and pulling out my phone. "A smart speaker. It's a wonderful invention. And it taught me a very old lesson. The truth is often found in what people say when they think no one is listening." I saw a flash of pure panic in Kevin's eyes. He knew. Jessica was still catching up, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. I held the phone up to the microphone. "I'd like to share with you a short recording I saved. It's a business discussion, you see, about my legacy, about the future of Miller Capital Partners." I pressed play. Kevin's voice, tinny and sharp, filled the silent ballroom. "The final power of attorney drafts are ready. We just need her signature." A collective gasp went through the room. Then, Jessica's voice, clear as a bell. God, I thought she was going to blow the whole thing with that tax question. And then, the fatal blow. The 2 words that had cost her everything, the sound of her light, cruel laugh. It's kind of hilarious when you think about it. All for some cookie money. I pressed stop. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a crushing physical weight. I looked down from the stage at my daughter. All the color had drained from her face. She looked like a ghost, her mouth open in a silent scream. Kevin was staring at his plate, his entire body rigid, as if he could will himself to disappear. Every single eye in that room, their friends, their colleagues, their neighbors, was locked on them, not with pity, but with a cold, stunned disgust. I leaned back toward the microphone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "It was never," I said, my voice dangerously soft, "just cookie money." Then I placed the award on the podium, turned, and walked off the stage. I didn't wait for the applause to die. I walked down the short steps from the stage and moved through the ballroom, a silent parting of the ways opening up before me. No one touched me. No one spoke to me. They just stared, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and a kind of horrified respect. I kept my chin high and my eyes fixed on the exit doors. I did not look back at the table where my daughter and her husband sat, frozen in the wreckage of their own making. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of their humiliation on my back all the way to the parking lot. The fallout wasn't a slow crumble. It was an avalanche. In a small town, news travels faster than fire. By the time I got home and made myself a cup of tea, my phone was already buzzing. It was Howard, the president of the chamber, stammering apologies that I had to endure such a thing on my night. By the next morning, the story was the only topic of conversation in every coffee shop and hair salon in the county. Kevin's reckoning was the swiftest. It turned out his firm's managing partner, a man named Mr. Abernathy, had been sitting at the table right next to theirs. He had heard every word. Kevin didn't even make it to his desk the next morning. His access card had been deactivated overnight. The call came from Abernathy himself while Kevin was still in his driveway, trying to figure out why the gate to the corporate parking garage wouldn't open for him. I heard about the conversation later from a friend whose nephew works at the firm. Abernathy didn't mince words. "We manage other people's money, Kevin," he'd said, his voice cold as a tombstone. "Our entire business is built on a single sacred commodity, trust. You publicly demonstrated a stunning lack of it. Pack your personal effects. Security will escort you." He was fired for gross ethical violations. But it got worse. The firm, in an act of furious self-preservation, initiated an internal audit of every account Kevin had ever touched. They found enough irregularities that they were legally obligated to report him to the SEC. His career wasn't just over, it was radioactive. Jessica's ruin was quieter, but in many ways, more complete. Her currency was social standing. She had built her identity around being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfectly put-together member of the community. And that community turned its back on her with brutal efficiency. The first calls she got were from the other mothers on the PTA fundraising committee, accepting her resignation. Then her friends, one by one, canceled their standing brunch dates with vague, flimsy excuses. The invitations to dinner parties simply stopped coming. She became a ghost in her own life. The most public shaming happened online, on the digital town square of our suburb, the Nextdoor app. Someone who had been at the dinner posted a thinly veiled summary of the events. "Did anyone else see the drama at the Chamber Awards last night? So sad what some people will do to their own parents." The comment section exploded. Within a day, everyone knew. People I hadn't spoken to in years were messaging me, offering support, and sharing their own stories of elder care nightmares. For Jessica, a simple trip to the grocery store became an ordeal. The cashiers would suddenly be unable to meet her eye. Other shoppers would steer their carts down a different aisle when they saw her coming. She was no longer Jessica Miller, the successful marketing professional. She was the woman who tried to steal her mother's cookie money. They were forced to put their house on the market to pay for Kevin's mounting legal fees. The beautiful, modern home with the marble countertops, the one they were so proud of, now had a for sale sign planted in its perfectly manicured lawn. A public flag of their failure. During all of this, I stayed in my own home, the one my hands had paid for. I didn't gloat. There was no joy in watching my daughter's life implode. There was only a profound and weary sense of justice. It was like watching a house of cards, built on a foundation of lies and greed, finally collapse under the weight of its own emptiness. I had simply provided the gentle breeze that knocked over the first card. I thought about all the sacrifices, all the 2 a.m. mornings. I thought about the promise she had made to me at her college dorm, the promise to take care of me. She had tried to keep it, in her own twisted way. She had tried to take care of my assets, take care of my legacy by absorbing it into her own. She just forgot the most important part. You don't take care of a person by erasing them. The phone calls to my house stopped. The manipulative visits ended. The silence they left behind was vast. But for the first time in a long time, it wasn't an empty silence. It was a peaceful one. It was the sound of my own life, waiting for me to begin again. That sound of my own life, waiting to begin again, turned out to be the familiar, comforting hum of a commercial convection oven. 6 months after the awards dinner, I stood in the doorway of what used to be Evelyn's hearth. The name was still painted in faded gold leaf on the front window, but the inside was transformed. The old glass display cases where my pastries used to sit were gone. In their place were 6 gleaming stainless steel workstations. The air no longer smelled of just my recipes. It was a vibrant, chaotic symphony of scents, cilantro and lime from one station, melting chocolate and raspberry from another, the savory aroma of roasting garlic from a third. The heartbeat of the place, the low hum of the Hobart mixer, was still there, but now it was joined by the sizzle of pans and the excited, collaborative chatter of young, hopeful voices. After the dust settled, the first thing I did was buy back my old shop. It had been sitting empty, a sad, dusty relic. But I didn't want to reopen the bakery. My time of waking up at 2 a.m. was over. I wanted to do something different. So, I used a portion of my cookie money to turn the space into a non-profit incubator kitchen, a place where aspiring local chefs and bakers who had the passion but not the capital could rent a fully equipped station for a tiny fraction of the usual cost. I didn't want my legacy to be a bank account. I wanted it to be a launching pad. I called it the Hearth Collective. I didn't bake much myself anymore. I was more of a landlord, a mentor, a quiet presence in the corner with a cup of coffee. I'd watch them work, these young entrepreneurs, their faces tense with concentration, their movements full of a desperate, beautiful energy I knew so well. They were all chasing a dream, just like I had all those years ago. The difference was, they weren't doing it alone. That afternoon, I was watching a young man named Alex. He couldn't have been more than 25. He was meticulously piping choux pastry onto a baking sheet, his brow furrowed in concentration. His dream was to open a French patisserie, but he was working 2 jobs just to afford the rent on his tiny apartment. The Hearth Collective was the only shot he had. He looked up and saw me watching, and a shy smile broke across his face. He wiped his hands on his apron and walked over, holding out a perfectly golden cream puff. "For the landlady," he said. "Quality control." I took a bite. It was perfect. The pastry was light as air, the cream rich and not too sweet. "Alex," I said, my voice full of genuine admiration, "this is exceptional." He flushed with pleasure. "It's my grandfather's recipe. He had a little bakery back in the old neighborhood, had to sell it when he got sick." He hesitated for a moment, then his expression grew serious. "My uncle, my dad's brother, he was supposed to manage the sale. He told my grandpa he only got a little for it. We found out years later he'd sold it for 3 times that and pocketed the difference." I placed my hand on his arm. I didn't need to say anything. He saw the understanding in my eyes. "That's why this place," he said, gesturing around the busy kitchen, "is so important. My dad always told me, never trust anyone with what you've built. But that's not the right lesson, is it?" He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "The lesson isn't don't trust anyone. The lesson is fight for what's yours. I heard about what you did, Mrs. Hayes. Everyone did. Thank you for showing me, for showing all of us, that you have to fight for what you've built." His words settled deep inside me. He was right. In all my months of pain and anger, I thought my fight had been about reclaiming my money, about punishing my daughter's betrayal. But it was never just about that. It was about defending the very principle of a life's work. It was about honoring the sacrifices, my own and those of everyone like Alex's grandfather. Greed doesn't just steal money. It tries to erase the story of how that money was earned. It tries to turn a lifetime of sweat and dedication into a simple transaction. I looked around the bustling kitchen, at the young woman decorating a cake with the same steady hands I once had, at the 2 brothers taste-testing a new hot sauce, their faces lit with excitement. My daughter had seen a nest egg to be raided. But I had created a nest, a place where new dreams could be hatched. "Your grandfather would be very proud of you, Alex," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't sadness. It was a kind of fierce, protective joy. I had lost a daughter, but I had gained a new kind of family, a family built not on blood, but on a shared passion for creation, a family bound by the holy trinity of flour, sugar, and hope. This was my real legacy, not a number in a bank account, but the warm, vibrant, living pulse of this kitchen. This was my hearth, reborn. My hearth was reborn, and in a way, so was I. I had spent so many years measuring my life by what I could give to my daughter. My success was her success. My sacrifices were her foundation. I had poured everything I was into her, and in the end, she saw the vessel, not the contents. She saw a balance sheet, not a life's work. She saw an asset to be liquidated, not a mother to be loved. The greatest lesson of these past few years wasn't about the sting of betrayal. It was about the quiet, solid strength of self-worth. I learned that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, a way of cleaning out a wound so it can finally heal. I forgave my daughter, not for her sake, but for mine. It was the only way to get the poison out. But forgiveness and trust are 2 very different things. Some breaks are too clean to be mended. Some fires burn so hot they turn trust to ash, and you can never rebuild with ash. I never spoke to her again. I hear things, now and then, through the small-town grapevine. They moved away, somewhere out west. Kevin is working in a different field, something far from the world of finance he once ruled. I hope, for her own sake, that she learned something, but her lessons are no longer my concern. My concern is the young woman at Station 3 who just perfected her grandmother's biscotti recipe. It's the two brothers who just signed their first distribution deal for their hot sauce. It's the warm, vibrant life that fills this building every single day. I learned that the most valuable thing you can ever build isn't a business, it's a backbone. The strength to stand up for yourself, to honor your own story, and to declare, with a voice that does not tremble, "This is mine, I built it, and it is not for sale." So let me ask you, when the world tries to tell you that your life's work is just cookie money, will you have the courage to remind them of the fire it was baked in? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the hardest of times.